Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. So on today's podcast, we have Vince Cullen. So Vince is the founder of the Hungry Ghost Retreats and the Fifth Precept Fellowship. He's known for his work in addiction, particularly as relates to the Buddhist path. So Vince, welcome.
Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. I understand you're in Ireland.
I am in Tipperary. As an alcoholic, when I was an alcoholic 21 years ago, I would have loved my own pub. And here we are 21 years later, and I bought an old pub in Tipperary, which I hope to turn into a mindfulness retreat centre some point in the future.
Wonderful. Well, we've got lots in common. We have never actually met. I've been trying to get to your Hungry Ghost Retreats for a while, never quite made it. We're both Buddhists and both recovering alcoholics, as I understand it. And I also was given the keys to a pub last Christmas. I was staying at a pub, and the owner said, "Look, it's Christmas. I don't really want to hang around. Here's the keys." And she gave me the keys to her pub, and I was there as a sort of sober, dry, recovering alcoholic in a pub with the keys with my wife, thinking, well, 10, 20 years ago, this would have been a great party. And it's completely going to waste now. So, I can relate to that. So let's get into it. How did you become interested in the body? What was your interest in the body? And then I'm sure we'll segue into your work with addiction.
It's my training, really, over the last few years. I've been doing some dedicated training along the lines of Dharma practice or Buddhist practice and mindfulness teachers practice, and increasingly just my own studies, my own experiential aspect is the embodiment of the work. The embodiment. It's all very well saying to people, be kind, be compassionate, be appreciative, be equanimous. But they can be very mental functions, a mental factor. For me, these teachings that lead away from suffering are about embodying those characteristics. That the more we embody our intentions, the more stable we are, the less likely we are to be knocked sideways.
Great. So it's a Buddhist path which perhaps gets mischaracterized by people, as I understand it. It's about the end of suffering, and it could be conceptualized as sort of very mental. I've got to think about this, but actually, as you say, if people aren't having that in their bones, then how does it help?
Indeed, the very first instruction that the Buddha gives in one of his famous discourses on mindfulness is to know the body.
Yeah.
The largest section of this talk, very important talk, is about getting to know the body, knowing the body as the body, inside and out. So he places this great emphasis on being embodied before he moves off into the mental realms.
So you're talking about the Satipatthana Sutta, are you? The foundations of mindfulness. Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? So those of you that aren't familiar with this model listening, the foundations of mindfulness this is what it's all based on, the modern mindfulness movement. It's the original old school text. And the first one is body, right? And you've quoted it very beautifully there, that it says knowing the body as the body inside and out. And I can't, for me, that's a beautiful definition of embodiment right there. It's not the body as object, it's as the body, as a body inside and out, before going off into emotions or the mental kind of chatter of the mind. This is the foundation. Absolutely.
So over the last few years, that's becoming more and more apparent to me. And in my own experience, the ability to be able to pick up things in your body before or at the same time or before you experience them mentally can be hugely beneficial. To be able to say, this is anger, or this is rage.
Yeah.
This is sadness arising, and to know what it feels like in the body.
And that's where that's going on, right? Like, if it's not rage as an abstract concept, it's a muscular contraction. It's a very visceral thing. So I guess if as Buddhists kind of working with these areas, for me, I know my experience, if I'm not working with the body, I'm missing a very strong way in, a way of noticing and then also working with these things, right? And I mean, even mindfulness of breathing, the classic Buddhist meditation, what is breathing? It's not a thought, it's body.
And it's grounded in the here and now, in this moment. You can't breathe in the past. You can't breathe in the future. You can only breathe in this moment. While we're on this sort of this Buddhist aspect of moving on from addictions, I was lucky to attend 2 sets of teachings by the Dalai Lama over the last couple of years in Dharamsala, and on both occasions, the Dalai Lama makes this point about what is Buddhism, and he emphasizes first and foremost, Buddhism is a science. It's an investigation into what is, what's happening in your body, what's happening in your mind, how is the world constructed.
Yeah.
So it's this deep investigation into reality. He said, secondly, Buddhism can be a philosophy. It can be how we choose to live our lives. And he said, thirdly, for those who want to, Buddhism can be practiced as religion.
Uh-huh.
So, that's the Dalai Lama always puts science and facts before, rites and rituals of any religion.
And for me to say, it's empirical, or they're investigating the body, that requires that coming to the body and go, okay, what is actually happening, as opposed to what should be happening or what could be happening. And as you say, like, it's the anchor in the present moment, isn't it? The mind goes to the past, it goes to the future. It's very easy. Now I can be thinking about the future. I can be thinking, what am I going to ask Vince next? I can be thinking about the interview I did last night, or I can be like, okay, how is my body right now? And I notice I'm sort of relaxing and opening and going, it's a sort of sense of friendliness that I might want to encourage developing in my body as we begin the conversation.
Yeah. Go on.
Vince, we'd like to keep it interactive here. Would you be willing to lead a little body mindfulness exercise for listeners? Maybe just like a 1-minute thing to start the podcast, so people can get, and maybe bear in mind they may be driving or walking or standing, on the underground. Would you be willing to lead a little interactive body scan or something like that?
We can try something. On recent Hungry Ghost retreats, 5-day retreats, I've been using versions of the 3-minute breathing space that comes from the 8-week cognitive therapy and stress reduction courses.
Yeah.
And there's a short breathing space exercise in the mindfulness-based prevention 8-week program. But I use a similar one called MARA, this mindful awareness responds appropriately. Mm-hmm. And it's just very much a question of just, first and foremost, stopping, being mindful. I mean, what's happening right now in your mind? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What thoughts are present? What's the climate of your mind? Sometimes we use what's called the hindrances as a barometer. How much agitation is present? How much ill will is present? How much sleepiness is present? How much doubt, self-doubt is present? How much craving for things to be different is present? Just as a barometer of where we are. And then shift to our body. And how is all this manifesting itself in our body? Whatever we're experiencing mentally generally reflects in our body. So what am I feeling right now? Well, this is fear I'm experiencing, mild fear. And it feels like this. And then we just take a moment and take a deep breath. The Thai forest teacher Ajahn Chah, he used to encourage people to completely empty their lungs, all air. And before you pass out, take a very big deep breath in, completely filling your lungs, and just let that out very long, very slowly, feeling the breath in the whole body. And then just settling down to a natural breath just for a few moments. Any distractions, just let them go and come back to the breath. And then we return once again to our mental climate, our emotional climate. What are we feeling? What are we thinking now? Have things shifted in any way? And if they have, how does that feel in the body? And then for me, the important thing here at this point, this is where we be creative. This is where we choose how we're going to continue with our day, how we can continue in the next moment, whether we go into the bar or whether we meet the dealer or whether we turn on the computer, whatever it is, or we go to the fridge, whatever distraction we might be drawing us. Do we go ahead with that or do we choose a different path? And that is it.
Thanks, Vince. Lovely classic stuff. I know many listeners will have some familiarity with mindfulness or Buddhism, and for me, it's always worth coming back to. For those that don't, I'd really recommend looking into some of these things, like the hindrances. Again, it might seem It's a classic Theravada Buddhist model of kind of what can get in the way of mindfulness. And again, it might seem mental, but, agitation, that's bodily. Sleepiness, that's bodily. These are all things that happen in the body. And as you say, once we have some awareness and we take this pause, there can be some choice. Do I actually want to do the thing? And I just also encourage listeners to listen to all of these podcasts with an awareness of the body. It would be a bit ironic to listen to Embodiment podcasts without that. And how much more people could get from something on the internet, whether it's this podcast or anything else, while being aware of the body and tracking and noticing, what parts of our conversation they open to or close to, or if they're sleepy and might want to press pause and come back to it later, or if they're agitated and might want to rewind because they missed the last bit because they were distracted, how much more they'd get from the podcast with that sense of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I find them a very useful reminder and barometer.
You mentioned the Dalai Lama as well. My experience of his cuddliness, the Dalai, is a very visceral person. Actually, he's kind of solid and bodily in a way you might not expect, isn't he? He's kind of very, sort of like blokey almost. There's something very physical about him as a person.
Indeed. Although the last time I saw him this year, and he was starting to look a bit frail.
Sad to hear that.
But then, that's impermanence, isn't it? None of us are getting any younger, and our bodies, have a certain lifespan, and we can't go beyond that.
That's true for sure. Basic truth. I was only in Dharamsala briefly, and I taught some Aikido to some of his bodyguards. It was a really fascinating experience. He's really tough but very loving guys. There was some solid, this Tibetan embodiment of quite earthy, stocky, but very loving people, but tough as nails. Very wonderful to play with for a day. Anyway, so let's get into the main juice of what you do. So let's talk about addiction. What is addiction?
I think the phrase wanting to be anywhere else but here comes to mind. Doing anything else but this. It's these compulsions for what that may manifest in whichever way. An aversion to the present, a craving for pleasure, an aversion to the present. They manifest in so many different ways, very subtle, unconscious ways. From reaching to the fridge for something, to turning on the PC to see how many likes you got on Facebook. So it's a very broad spectrum. And I originally started the Hungry Ghost retreats with a view to helping people in the early stages of recovery. And I don't like that word.
Yeah.
We might come back to that.
Yeah.
But in the early stages of life after drugs and alcohol. But over the years since I started, I did the first one in 2011, I think it was. People started contacting me. Well, I'm a sex addict. Can I come along? I'm a shopaholic. Can I come along? I'm depressed. Can I come along? I suffer from social anxiety. Can I come along? I overeat. Can I come along? I undereat. Can I come along? And it for me now, everyone suffers from mental disease to one degree or another. We distract ourselves. We deny ourselves the present moment quite unconsciously. I love that the Buddha gives a lovely description of it, a very short description. He says there are two types of sickness. He says the first type of sickness is a sickness of body, he said. But there are people who can claim freedom from sickness of body for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. They can claim freedom from bodily disease for 20 years, 50 years. And there are even people who can claim freedom from bodily disease for 100 years. He said, but there are a few beings to be found in this world who can claim freedom from mental disease even for one moment.
Mm.
And I think that gives us a beautiful level playing field. We're all on the spectrum somewhere. We're all craving something or averse to something else. And it's the same path. The Buddha offers us the same path. Get to know what's really happening. Get to know what leads to your suffering, and get to know what leads you away from suffering. In some cases, he's very prescriptive. In other cases, he's quite, what works for you works for you.
So there's this idea maybe out there in popular culture that addiction is just like being a crack addict or something. And what I'm hearing from you is that actually it's fundamental to our psychology. We all suffer from this in various ways. You know, I'm long-term sober myself, 10 years in sobriety a couple of months back. And but what I notice is, you know, as you say, it might be the Facebook likes. You know, I did a post yesterday and it got a lot of likes, and I was checking it this morning before I barely had a cup of coffee. You know, before the beginning of the day, it might be, you know, it might be the coffee. It might be, you know, it's porn is what I'm hearing a lot about from people at the moment. You know, there's always something that people are doing that they don't want to do. You know, I had one friend of mine who works with addiction. She says, whatever the thing you're doing that you don't want to do is, that's an addiction. And how, you know, how many thousands of things, even in one day, do we do that we're doing compulsively? We're doing out of reactivity and habit, not out of a sense of awareness or choice.
Absolutely. And, you know, we have these inbuilt biases and distortions. And it's all part of natural selection's way of, you know, getting our species to continue. You know, how we get our genes into next generation and protect that generation into the following generation. So these biases and distortions and inbuilt cravings, that, you know, the reward, the D2 dopamine reward system, are there. You know, they worked when we were cavemen. But we're not cavemen now. We've got Stone Age brains in a space world.
It's very different conditions when you're surrounded by, let's take food and sex as examples. You know, in the past we might have, you know, been able to kill a gazelle or picked an apple off a tree, and now, you know, I go into shop and it's just huge amounts of chocolate. This is one I've been struggling a bit with. I've got someone on the show at a later point who's someone that's been coaching me around food, and I'm not a massive food addict. I'm not hugely obese, but I think like most people, at some point I eat because I don't want to feel, or I eat for some compulsive reason. I think very few people eat purely for hunger. And even as you say, and even if they are, they're not in a Stone Age world, you know, and the same with sex and porn and these kind of things. It's a very different psychological landscape we find ourselves in now than what we've evolved for.
Absolutely. And I think the Buddha saw some of this in his own being, and certainly in the people around him. And he spent 6 years, you know, investigating, you know, well, what's happening here? What is the cause of my discontent? What is the cause of my own suffering? And then he identified, what is this craving? It's this incessant, natural, you know, inbuilt craving that we have for things to be other than what they are. Whether that's a craving for sexual pleasures, craving for stimulation, whatever those sensual pleasures might be, you know, sex, drugs, music, you know, as they manifest throughout our six sense doors, sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, and pleasant thoughts, whether they be fantasies or otherwise. Or else we crave to be someone, to be something. We crave for stimulation, we crave for excitement, we crave for novelty. And he identified them all, these cravings, and the craving to be someone, something, the craving for continued existence beyond this life, sort of people who believe in other lives. And then, of course, we have the flip side of that is the craving for no existence.
Yeah, and as someone that used to drink a lot, that one of just sort of being not there, being wiped out, well, that's part of it, isn't it, for sure?
And that's certainly that craving not to exist. You know, it plays itself out in substance addictions and food addictions as well.
Yeah.
You know, people wanting to fade away and through food addictions, or, you know, in alcohol, just wanting to numb out from the world, just to go to sleep from the world, to disappear from the world. So, you know, the Buddha gave us, you know, all those examples, and when we investigate them ourselves, you know, we can see them in our own lives, or I can see them in my life. He kept saying, you know, don't let me tell you what to do. You've got to invest it. You know,
it's very modern, wasn't it? Very modern to say, you know, what's that sutta where he's kind of saying, look, don't believe it because of authority. Don't believe it because of this. There's a particular group of people that come to him. He says all the times you shouldn't believe, and it still sounds pretty modern, pretty radical today. And as you say, the basic embodied psychology hasn't changed. And there's an invitation there in Buddhism, isn't there, to sort of find out for yourself. And that really appealed to me as a sort of cynical young man. You know, I kind of rejected Christianity, and, you know, I've got a lot of friends who've rejected Judaism or whatever it is. And they've come to it and it says, look, don't believe me, sit down, feel your body, track your breathing, what's your experience? Can you pay attention to your breathing for more than 2 minutes? Of course you fucking can't, Okay, so we have this tendency to either push away things we don't like, and it might be, not wanting to feel in the body. And, what's interesting is I've tracked some of those feelings that I was drinking on to numb, or it's actually wanting sensation, isn't it? It's wanting the excitement in the body and then getting craving for that and going, I want more of that. Give me another line, give me another shot, whatever it is.
Yeah, that craving for stimulation. Yeah. Craving for excitement. It plays itself out. And in whichever, on one retreat I gave, we have little 20-minute interviews. Everyone gets a chance for a 20-minute one-to-one interview, and one person was describing. They said they didn't consider themselves to have a drink problem, but about once a month they would binge drink with the intention of then looking for dangerous sex.
Wow.
So the two, so it was a binge drinking and then the dangerous sex. And the person just said, I'm now sitting here quite sober, waiting for the result of a HIV test.
Whoa.
Literally that craving for stimulation, that craving for excitement was putting that person's life at risk.
Yeah. And there's two definitions of addiction I like. One is that we do something we don't want to do. And the other one is that it also affects what we care about, whether that's our health or our work or, I remember talking to someone and saying, oh, are you a heavy user or are you an addict? And they said, well, it isn't really affecting my work or my health badly. And I was like, oh, good for you then, enjoy your beer or whatever, Personally, as a Buddhist, I wasn't, not my cup of tea, but I was also just like, well, it doesn't seem to be affecting them in a bad way. And for me, there's a line when it crosses into things like people having to have HIV tests or losing their job or whatever it is.
Absolutely. And, I've got no problem with people drinking a bottle of vodka or doing a line of Coke or smoking a rock of crack, injecting a bag of heroin. That's their lives. Does that bring them suffering or does it not bring them suffering? As long as it's harmless to me, then it's out of my sphere of influence. Since becoming sober, I've made these choices, quite embodied choices, in not to take drugs or alcohol.
Yeah. And as you say, I remember going to one of the monks at Chithurst Monastery, which you probably know, just down the road. We're in the same tradition, actually, I think. And I was asking him about some sort of internet social media thing. And he didn't know what it was. So he said, well, I don't really know how to give you advice on that. He just said, well, does it bring you suffering or does it make you happier? Does it lead to closer to enlightenment or further away from it? I was like, okay, that's clear. It was a very clear barometer for that. And let's go a little bit more into the bodily side of this. So when someone has this craving or aversion, and both of these could lead to what we might call addictions, what happens in the body? What happens when that's present, when you want the drink or the drug or the Facebook likes or whatever it is?
I can only speak for myself.
Yeah.
There was a time recently, as I say, I've moved to this old pub in rural Tipperary, and I have a small liking for chocolate myself.
Yeah.
And one evening after my dinner, the craving for chocolate arose so strongly in my body. I thought I was going to die. It surprised me that it was so strong. I thought, well, I just got to get into my car. I've got to drive half an hour now to the nearest Tesco's, which I think might be open at 11 o'clock at night. But I was I had to smile to myself because I noticed this real sense of, well, if I don't get it, I'm going to die. And this was chocolate.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because people often have this saying, the body doesn't lie. But in this case, the body is lying, right? It's saying, I had this with a sweet drink the other day. I was leaving the house and trying to find a shop that was open at 11 o'clock at night. And I thought, God, I feel like I'm a drug addict again. And maybe I'm a bit of a sugar addict. So it was that sense of gotta get it. And my system's telling me I'm going to die if I don't get it. I'm not breathing. I'm not relaxed. I'm not all these things that I teach people on a daily basis. I'm way off center. My balance is off. And I'm going, bloody hell. And this is just because I want a sweet drink at the end of the day.
And that's the mind will affect the body, and the body will affect the mind. And that's why even sitting on a meditation cushion or a meditation stool or sitting in a chair, just the intentionality and the posture we adopt will affect our mind, whether we become calm or agitated, whether we have an aversion to sitting. Equally, when our mind calms down, our body calms down. The two relate to each other.
And this is something people could do actually listening, isn't it? It's like to look around your environment, and is there something you want, like your mobile phone? As soon as I take my mobile phone in my hand, or maybe, you know, someone's listening to this on the London Underground, they can see an advert for some food, or Wonder Bra advert. They're always the ones that get me on the London Underground. Bloody hell, I could do without that some days. And you notice what happens in your body, right? Like when you look at the phone or the food or the Wonder Bra advert or whatever it is like, are you relaxed? Are you balanced? Are you open? My guess would be no. That would be my prediction. But like anyone listening to this, don't believe me and Vince. Like, test it out for yourself, right?
Very much so. And, you know, this is where mindfulness really comes into its own. And some of the clinical definitions we're given of mindfulness, really, I don't find helpful. You know, the original word or the Pali word for mindfulness, sati, which comes from the Sanskrit word satya, and the original meanings of these words were to remember.
Yeah.
Remember something you'd heard, not to forget. You know, the present moment recollection. So to constantly be in the present moment, not only with what we're thinking, but what we're feeling. You know, in this first step of mindfulness, what's happening in our body, to know the body as the body. So to constantly know, if I'm standing on, I haven't been on the London Underground in many years, so I don't know what the current adverts are. But, you know, if I'm standing there and there's an advert for chocolate, how does that manifest itself in my body? And can I just identify that as a craving instantly, or you know, as soon as I realise, you know, craving chocolate. So this, sorry.
No, after you.
This aspect of mindfulness, that being ever present, being ever aware of what's happening in you and around you, you know, that's where the true liberation ends, or the true liberation begins. And so, to embody some of these qualities, you know, to embody mindfulness as a quality and awareness, to embody those other aspects that the Buddha recommended, you know, of kindness, of compassion, of joy, and of balance, of equanimity, to embody those practices. And you know, he mentions those 4 particular qualities on so many occasions. You know, he highlights it to both monastics and non-monastics. You know, if you really want to end suffering, you know, practice kindness, practice compassion, practice joy, and practice equanimity. And these are, you know, embodied practices. If you look at the Dalai Lama or Thich Nhat Hanh from the Vietnamese Zen tradition, or Pema Chodron from the Tibetan tradition, you look at these people and they glow. They embody their practice.
That's what really drew me to Buddhism, really, was that, you know, A, my own troubled mind, B, this sort of empirical thing where I wasn't told to believe anything. It was like, go check it out. See, I come from a martial arts background, so I sort of really got the idea of practice. It was like, hey, if you want to get good at this arm lock, then, you know, practice it. If you want to get good at kindness, sit down and do the metta meditation. And the big one you mentioned there was, I was just impressed by some of the people that I saw. And of course, you know, I saw the full spectrum of people. But on the whole, when I went to Guy House, which I know we share in common, and, you know, I met people, I went, kind of nice people. There's something going on there. You know, met Rob down there, whoever it was. I was like, oh, nice. You know, there's something, even just as being around them, that I quite enjoy, you know, and not that they weren't perfect or anything like that, but there was a quality I picked up on. Just to come back to mindfulness, you know, as a word, mindfulness sounds very cognitive, doesn't it? Mind. And as I equally understand that it means something more like coming back to the present moment, remembering to return to the present moment, remembrance. And you know, I've heard bodyfulness kicked about a little bit. I might be writing a book with that title to sort of bring the body back in. And as you say, that's the foundation. In some ways, it's the easier part of mindfulness in some ways, isn't it? Because I remember when I first started meditating, this Tibetan monk said, oh, be aware of your thoughts. And I went, how could I possibly be aware of my thoughts? I am my thoughts. You know, I hadn't yet got that separation from realizing that they weren't me. They were just an object in awareness. But the body was like, all right, my butt hurts. and my back aches. It's kind of something solid I can get to grips with.
Yeah, and then of course, I to some extent, I quite like discomfort when sitting, because then that highlights our aversions.
You can work with that, yeah.
It's really worth working with. So mindfulness, as it's certainly in the clinical sense, it's doing wonders around the world. But mindfulness without ethics is an inferior product, and some of the conditions behind our agitations, the conditions behind our anxieties,
the
conditions behind our depression, are these senses of not good enough, or unworthiness, or guilt, or shame, and if we just practice some ethical living, and again, which is an embodied practice, very much an embodied practice, an embodied morality, where we don't harm ourselves or other people, where we respect other people's property, and we don't crave for other people's property. We look after, we respect it, and we don't take anything that's not been freely given. Where we are respectful in our sexual motivations, our sexual behaviour, where we don't indulge in sexual misconduct, where we try to speak kindly and truthfully, and not gossip, not so on, and particularly where we don't take drugs or alcohol or anything else that leads to suffering. And those, the ethicality of trying to live by those simple suggestions takes so much suffering out of our lives. I just followed one of those suggestions for the first few years.
Right. Yeah. What, I haven't killed anyone today. That's good. But as you say, like, ethics has often been taken out of mindfulness, and that is, one of the key embodied practices. And I know for a fact, for example, there are sniper schools, pickup artist schools, and Wall Street traders, and who use mindfulness. And all of those people, of course, might be, perfectly wonderful human beings. I don't want to demonize those groups. I know people in the military, for example, are perfectly good human beings. However, the removal of ethics is certainly going to, at best, make the mindfulness ineffective. And, another possibility is just becoming a sort of sharper sword that does harm. That's
absolutely. So if from my perspective anyway, if mindfulness isn't in the service of reducing suffering, then it's not mindfulness. It's something else.
Yeah. And ethics really does help, doesn't it? I remember just yesterday I was walking down the street and I told a little white lie, maybe even a slightly grey lie. And it was just on my mind, and I was thinking about it. I was like, but then I'm going to have to tell another lie, and then, and it was like a whole kind of cascade. And I thought, God, I haven't been present for the last 5 minutes of walking along the street, that was just one little thing. It wasn't like, I was killing people on a daily basis or something, And I thought, wow, that really affected my mindfulness the last 5 minutes, just walking along the street on the way to my yoga class, ironically. And and ethics themselves are a practice, right? Like when I say, right, I'm going to try and be a little bit more honest in my yoga class, or I'm going to be a little bit more kind to myself. That necessitates awareness to do that. So it's a kind of nice bi-directional link, I guess you could call it.
Absolutely. And, sitting on the cushion, 20 minutes in, half an hour into a sit, and our legs are aching, our knees are throbbing, our back's aching. but we're instructed not to move, to stay with the pain, to stay with the discomfort. And but there is a point where we go beyond the aversion to the discomfort and the pain, and we do move out of compassion and kindness. And that's the right reason to move in those circumstances.
So what I think this telling the difference between just grasping and kindness is kind of key, isn't it? To go, okay, am I just being lazy here, or actually being kind to myself in taking a day off, or having a sleep in, or maybe not doing the practice I was going to do, and just taking a sleep, resting for that hour long of the meditation retreat. And also, you said the heart practices, like the metta and the compassion practices, like they've often not been practiced. And for me, the kind of the Brahmaviharas, the heart practices have been extremely embodied, extremely visceral. And I did mindfulness for a while and I got quite sharp, but it wasn't until I did the heart practice that people started saying, oh, you actually seem like a nicer human being to be around now,
Absolutely. And, in my own experience, 21 years ago when I was still drinking at work, I almost swore then. I wasn't a very nice person
You
to
can
be
swear on
around.
here. It's fine. We're swearing friendly.
Um, I wasn't a very nice person to be around.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the guys I worked with then, and I'd only left work a couple of years ago, they wouldn't recognize me now.
Yeah. Yeah. And
They wouldn't recognize me as a human being, with the way I speak, the way I present myself. And that's all down to these heart practices.
yeah. And there's no peace, is there, when you're in that addiction? Okay, there's two kind of active alcoholics outside, sort of shouting at each other outside the supermarket I walked out of yesterday on my way home with my food. And I looked at them, I thought, can I help here? And I didn't think I could, because there was so much conflict and anger and so much confusion that I thought, I'm just going to add to that if I try and intervene in any way here. And there wasn't any peace, there wasn't any listening. I think they were a couple, actually, like a male-female couple. And I just, I really felt for them, because it was like, wow, you're really in hell there. It's, in the Tibetan tradition, it's a hell realm as such, isn't it? This Tibetan model of hell realms and hungry ghost realms. I mean, you have a retreat called Hungry Ghost Realms. So maybe you could say a little bit about the realms psychological model.
Absolutely. Yeah, this, and it is a model. It's just this psychological model and it existed before the Buddha. And in the Buddha's time, there are only 5 realms, and as Tibetan Buddhism developed, a 6th realm was added to this cosmology. So from the Tibetan aspect, there are 3 heaven realms: the realm of the devas, the shining ones, the stars, the
celebrities.
Indeed, yeah, and the devas, the shining ones, where when everything is going well, that's a heavenly state. There's the additional heaven realm that added at a later point of the angry gods.
These are titans. Is that the other translation of that? Yeah.
And this realm where we have everything. We absolutely have everything we need. We don't need anything else. But we're still jealous of the devas. We're still jealous of those people in the heaven realm.
Yeah, so these are sort of, I sometimes feel this kind of energy when I'm in a business world, quite a lot, sort of quite powerful, wealthy people, but maybe they're not famous or artistic, or, there isn't quite that kind of sense of beauty in their life.
Indeed. So it might be, I've never experienced it myself, but it might be that I would have everything I possibly need in my life: my right job, the right partnership, the right security. But I'm still feeling that there's something missing. There's something insufficient in my life. So that was a later addition. But in terms of a mental state, that exists. Yeah. And then the third heavenly realm is the realm of human beings, just being human.
It's interesting. That's a heaven realm, right? And as I understand it, it's like you've got the best conditions for awareness, because you're suffering enough to motivate you, but not so much that you can't fucking handle anything, like these guys that I saw last night,
That's right. So, 10,000 joys, 10,000 sorrows, and that's just being human. So, that's an embodied state for us, just to be human.
To be accepting and forgiving of oneself, right? To be like, okay, I ate a piece of chocolate cake. It's not the end of the world. Maybe I regret it a little bit. Let's do better today. You know what I mean? Like, to be a bit kind to yourself around these things.
Indeed. So just to say, well, I'm only human, without using that as an excuse for really unskillful.
Sure. And I see in the yoga land, I work in yoga communities quite a lot. There's a little bit of sort of the God realm, the Deva realm there, where everyone's kind of super pure and young and beautiful and shiny, but underneath that, secretly terrified they're going to get a wrinkle or swear or eat a piece of cake or something. That's where I see the Deva realm quite a lot. It's everyone's beautiful and drinks green smoothies, but it's a little underneath that, there's something else.
Absolutely. And
then with the hell realms,
we have the 3 hell realms, and so we have this realm, the animal realm, where we just survive, we're just existing, we're just getting by. And I spent, after I gave up drinking, I spent a fair bit of time there, just getting by, not knowing what to do or where to go. And I often think of people perhaps on a methadone script.
Yeah.
Much just in the animal realm, just surviving, just getting by, nothing really happening.
And here we're at the whim of our bodily impulses, right? And I sometimes think people occasionally confuse this with embodiment. They're like, oh, I'm really embodied, so I'm just going to shag everyone who I feel like shagging. And it's like, no. Like, where's the choice? Where's the freedom in that? Where's the awareness? Like, the animal doesn't have a choice. If you put a horny male dog in front of a horny female dog, they'll fuck each other, right? And there's not really any choice in that. They don't go, well, actually, maybe we don't need puppies right now. You know, maybe there's not enough food for puppies. They can't make a skillful choice. They're just an instinct.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the animal realm, or the animal mind state. And then we have the hot and cold hell realms. Where you know, from my perspective, where we just torture ourselves. You know, we don't need anyone else to torture us.
Yeah.
You know, our self-loathing, self-hatred. You know, we torture ourselves in that realm. And then the last hell realm is this hell realm of the hungry ghosts. These beings who can never get enough. Their cravings can never be satisfied. The one description, you know, of this realm is that, you know, everything you touch in that world turns to shit.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a better description of hitting rock bottom. And certainly in my own, you know, recovery, you know, things were getting really, really bad. Everything I was touching was not going well. So I eventually, you know, got myself out of that realm, but spent a good time with one foot in the hot and cold realms, beating myself up, self-loathing, self-hatred, unforgiveness, and one foot in the realm of the animals, just surviving from day to day with nowhere really to go.
Yeah. And it might be a couple of years. Yeah, it can take time, kind of, and you move between them on a daily basis as well, right? You know, and it's maybe for listeners, just to keep it interactive again, to ask, you know, look at the environment you're in and which of these realms is it in. You know, when I was in Sierra Leone or Afghanistan or something, you know, it's a hell realm. You know, it's just, you just try to survive. And then there's the animal realm of kind of just being in that space where, maybe my kind of greed for food is getting the better of me. And maybe someone's listening to this while stuffing a sandwich down their face and not, you know, being aware of it. Or maybe you're in you're in Boulder, Colorado, and everything's perfect. And it's the sweet perfume of, the heaven realms, you know. So I just invite people listening to this to go internally and externally. Which realm are you in right now?
And, you know, we move around these realms instantly. At the end of a 5-day Hungry Ghost retreat, I ask people to fill in a short questionnaire. And when I read them, you know, I might pick up the first one as wonderful. You know, you changed my life. You know, I'm so glad I came. And instantly, I'm in the heaven realms.
Yeah.
Instant. That's where I am.
Yeah.
But then I'll pick up the next feedback form, and it will say, I've just wasted 5 days of my life. And I plummet immediately into the hot and cold realm of, you know, what a bad teacher I am.
Torturing yourself.
Yeah. So I can move between those mind states instantly. But the trick is, of course, to spend most of our time not in the heaven realm, not in the God's realm, not in the hell realms, but to spend our time in the human realm. Yeah, just being human. 10,000 joys, 10,000 sorrows. That's life.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I did a solitary retreat once, and on the last day I read the diary, and there's a book there, and everyone that went there wrote a page in the book. And some of them were like, I'm in hell. Some of them were like, I'm in heaven. And it was clear that it was such an inside job, because it was obviously the same place with the same food for everyone. You know, it was very simple. There wasn't anyone else there. There wasn't any other conditions. You know, everyone was in the exact same condition. So it's partly the inside job. But of course, you know, the external world can help if we have some of those basic needs met. If, you know, this is why I'm a big believer in sort of societies where people have basic needs met and aren't trying to survive. And obviously in terms of drug addiction, that's the people I saw last night in the street, you know, they're in a condition where it would be very difficult to even talk with them. And so the fifth precept, you may have heard us refer to, listeners, on this. So that's the precept against taking intoxicants, right? That's a key part of Buddhism, part of other religions too, as well. Like, you know, the Muslims don't drink alcohol. It's part of a number of traditions. So what is really the solution here then? So there's mindfulness. We practice mindfulness, become more aware of being able to create a bit of a pause between action and response, you know, instead of going to reaction. What are some of the tools you give people on your Hungry Ghost retreats? What are some of the things you find effective? If someone's listening to this and going, yeah, Mark, Vince, great, I get it. I have addictions. I get it. What helps? What really works for people?
I think what really works, if you can introduce people to this process of investigation, this present moment investigation into what's happening right now for me, what's happening in
Mm,
my body,
mm.
what's happening in my mind. And of course, we do that through, the meditation gym. Well, I don't like to use the word meditation because it doesn't describe what we're doing when we sit on that cushion.
Yeah.
When we sit on that cushion, we're cultivating something, we're planting some seeds, we're bringing something into being. Even if we're just watching our breath for half an hour, we're bringing something into being. We're cultivating a way of being. Where we're investigating how things really are. So the word meditation doesn't cover that. And particularly when it comes to the heart practices, when we're sitting down, we're cultivating heart practices.
Yeah, it's like growing a garden, isn't it? There's an activity, it's an investigation, it's a gardening, it's a gym. There's something much more active going on there, isn't there?
So it's not just this meditation, contemplation aspect, but being able to sit down and just watch your breath, to put the pause between the stimulus and the response. As
Yeah.
Viktor Frankl said, between the stimulus and the response, that's where our freedom lies, the freedom to choose.
Mm.
So we
And that's
have
a
this.
muscle you build, right, as well. This is something that I've noticed when I've come out of a retreat, say, or I've been practicing a lot at home. It just becomes so much easier not to pick up the chocolate bar, not to go on the Facebook. Even like, why would I do that? And as you say, that there's kindness, like, wow, this is just not a kind thing for me to do to myself, and it's not going to create kindness for anyone else. This isn't going to create a good mind state for me working, body mind state, to be working with anyone else in the world, if I'm teaching tomorrow or whatever it is. And I think reconnecting to the kindness part, building that muscle of mindfulness, creating some choice in there. And I'm redoing all this again with food at the moment. It's fascinating because my coach for this is like, well, notice how you feel before you overeat and what do you want to not feel? And I'm like, it's really classic stuff. And I don't know, there's almost this temptation. We want like the pill that fixes it all rather than to actually learn a skill. Do you know what I mean by that?
Absolutely. So one of the first things I would teach or encourage is just sitting. Just sitting for the sake of relaxing the body, quietening the mind, just enjoying being where you are. That we just 10 minutes of just sitting with your breath, with your body, just being there, being with yourself, for yourself is so important. And then learning not to run away from discomfort.
Yeah, the turn towards, they call it sometimes, don't they? The turning towards. And that can sound a bit abstract. What do you mean by turning towards? Is it just simply being present with the thing that I'd rather not feel?
Indeed. And actually, what is it then? What are you feeling? What are you feeling? A craving? Are you feeling anger? Are you feeling hatred? Are you feeling doubt? What's manifesting in your body? Just this ability to keep coming back. And the more we practice, we can identify with whichever set of phrases or barometer we want to use. What exactly is happening for me now? So I would most definitely these early sitting periods are just about calming the body, sitting still for 10 minutes.
Getting that basic sort of self-regulation where people can relax a little bit, learn to be with themselves and create a little bit of space so you're not in the off license buying the 10 Stellas before you know what you're doing, right?
There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. There's no one to be. Just be yourself. Sit down quietly for 10 minutes with your breath, with your body, and enjoy it. Enjoy each and every breath.
There's the practice, the being with yourself, and there's other aspects to it, isn't there? Like community. I know I'm going to be around. I've got a fellow recovering alcoholic cutting my hair today. I'm having a haircut today, and I know that just being around him is going to be a positive influence on me. It's like a mini meeting, as it were, And talking to you, it's a positive thing. And being with my wife in the evening, she has a certain mind. She's not going to be, she might have one beer, but she's not drinking alcoholically. So it's also sort of who you associate with, isn't it? And I know that's a big part of Buddhism that's often missed. It's not just doing your app alone, sitting and meditating on your own every day with your Headspace app. It's also community, Sangha, whether that's online or offline.
Absolutely. As one of my teachers would say, the Buddha was very, very keen on people, practicing in solitude. And he would send them off into the forest to practice on their own. But he was equally keen for the whole community to come together and to practice together.
Yeah.
when his cousin Ananda said to him, Buddha, this community, this fellowship, this camaraderie, this is the whole of the spiritual life. And the Buddha said, no, Ananda, no. He said, no, this community, this camaraderie, this is the whole of. Sorry, Ananda says it's half of the spiritual life.
Yeah, he said it's a big part of it, didn't he? And Buddha said, no, it's all of it.
All of it, this camaraderie, this community, this fellowship. So it's very important. And that's sort of on the tail end of what I would... of a Hungry Ghost retreat. In fact, the whole process of the Hungry Ghost retreat is rather like a process workshop, and the whole thing is about building community, about building fellowship. So after encouraging people to sit on their own and to calm their bodies, calm their minds, then we start looking at forgiveness, forgiving ourselves for the mistakes of the past. We're only human.
Yeah.
Forgiving others for their mistakes.
Yeah.
We start to let go of these really embodied, unhelpful emotions. You've heard this in America. There's this clinical condition called unforgiveness.
That's a clinical condition where we just don't forgive anyone, is it?
A clinical condition. So people with life-threatening illnesses, if they suffer from unforgiveness, where they're holding resentments and pain from the past, which they can't let go of, they're 30%, or I think it might be 37%, more likely to die.
Wow. And that kind of matches common sense in some way, doesn't it? I remember I was in Israel years ago. I was about 15, and I met some Holocaust survivors, and they had these numbers tattooed on their arms, so I knew they were Holocaust survivors. And I was in a kibbutz I was in, and I was chatting to them, and I said, "You seem really happy." And I knew about the Holocaust a little bit, so I kind of was surprised. I thought they'd be miserable. And I said, "You must be just full of hatred to the Germans, the Nazis." And they said, no, we can't afford that. All our friends who hated the Nazis are now all dead. And they didn't mean in the concentration camps. They meant of various illnesses, heart disease, cancer, etc., that they'd had in the sort of 50s and 60s. All the ones that and I'm not sure, I can't count for everyone. This is what they said. They said to me, "We can't afford that. We have to be joyful and be forgiving, or else we wouldn't be here." And they were this cute old couple that must have been 70 at the time, and they were giggling and laughing and clearly had no resentment. I thought, fucking hell, if I'm resentful of the person that cut me up in traffic this morning, they're not resentful of the people that wiped out half their family. It's kind of amazing.
So, and then the other aspect of forgiveness is forgiving ourselves and introducing this element of self-love, self-compassion. I couldn't believe when I first read Jack Cornfield's book, A Path with Heart, the chapter on loving kindness, the chapter on metta, where we're actually encouraged to love ourselves. Coming from an Irish Catholic background, this thought of being told to love yourself and only love yourself.
Yeah.
Until you get good enough that then you'll be able to wholeheartedly offer that love and kindness out to other people.
And it's a big thing, isn't it? It's a big thing in terms of, I've seen people that have anger issues, addiction issues. A lot of the people I've coached have a problem with that underneath the anger or the addiction. There isn't that sort of kindness, because why would you do that to yourself if you had self-love? It's like, why would you treat someone like that? And, I sometimes begin just treat us as if a friend, that we can reverse the metta practice. So it starts with the easy person and not with the self, from the traditional way or the other way around. Okay, so we've talked about this, building this foundation of mindfulness to create choice, and working with kindness and ethics as a kind of surrounding the Sangha as a foundation for that. It's starting to look like a pretty good recipe for recovery or sobriety right there, isn't it?
Absolutely. So when I first stopped drinking, I sat in my kitchen in Newbury in Berkshire in England, and I poured out my last glass of beer. And while I was drinking it, I made a promise to myself never to touch alcohol again, and a conscious choice not to switch addictions, so not to go out and seek some other distraction. And I held that intention for a couple of years. It was a very, I wouldn't say my recovery, I'll talk about recovery, that word recovery later, but I would say my recovery was successful. It was very half-hearted, reluctant recovery. I was not happy. But I had that promise, and I was going to keep it no matter what. I had that vow, I was going to keep it. And when I went off to this monastery in central Thailand, Wat Tamprabot Monastery, and speaking to the first abbot about the treatment they offer there, which I had assumed was all to do with this vomiting detox they do there, the herbal medicine, the herbal steam baths, the chanting that the monks do in the evening. I thought that's what the treatment they offered, and he said no. He said no, that's just 5%. It's very real and very rapid detox.
Yeah.
He said, but it's just 5%. He said 95% is the vow you take, the promise you take, not to touch drugs and alcohol. And that's when the penny dropped for me that this isn't about me abstaining from doing something I want to do.
Yeah.
This is about abandoning that whole way of life.
Yeah.
And that's where I started to embody my sense of recovery.
Uh-huh.
So I shifted from a half-hearted recovery to a wholehearted recovery. I wasn't stopping myself doing something I wanted. I was adopting a new way of life that I wanted to have for myself.
I think it's very important, isn't it? Because if you feel like giving up something, there can be this sense of like, now I look at alcohol and I think, God, why would I want to be like those people outside the supermarket last night? And I can remember, and they remind me what I was like when I was just wretched, and ill and unpleasant, unethical, and doing things I regretted. And why would I want that? That doesn't make sense to me. And it's moving towards something I do want rather than just away from something I don't is super helpful.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I didn't know it at the time because my practice, my Dharma practice or Buddhist practice hadn't started yet. But, I was moving away from suffering.
Yeah.
I was moving towards the end of suffering. But on its own, that vow, that satya, whether you do it at your kitchen table in England or whether you do it, vomiting in a gutter in Thailand, it's the same thing. It's that intentionality. So, and I like to think of it as an embodied intentionality. That vow for me now is an embodied intentionality.
I've worked with a lot of alcoholics in my 10 years of sobriety. You do see people kind of when they turn a corner and really make that choice. And what's interesting, it's not the clever ones. It's something in people. They go, right, I've had enough now. They kind of give up. There's a surrender to it. And I know in AA, which is a program I love and respect and I'm part of, but, also could criticize in other ways. And it gets a lot of criticism online. There is that sense of surrender. But I've also noticed that there's a lot of like Noah Levine, yourself, there's a lady in the Triratna tradition. There's been several books on, Buddhist recovery that have been written by different groups. It seems to be popping up this link between Buddhism and addiction recovery. And maybe the 12-step model kind of doesn't work for everyone, or the sort of higher power thing is difficult for some people. So I'm really happy that this kind of Buddhist approaches to recovery, which are, as far as I see it, completely consistent with AA anyway. Like we have a meditation period in several of the meetings I go to. I'm not traditional AA, as you'll notice. I'm talking about it publicly. I sort of think once you're into sort of 5-10 years sobriety, then okay, it's okay to talk about it a little bit. It's not as shameful as it was maybe in the 1930s.
It's actually, it's a very kind thing to do, to talk about it, to normalize it.
Yeah, to put it out there and say to people, I put it on Facebook a couple of times, I'm celebrating 10 years sobriety today, and immediately I get this message saying, hey, Mark, can we talk? I think I've got a problem. And I'm like, yeah, no problems, brother.
So, I like to say there is life after drugs and alcohol, and it's a bloody good life.
Yeah, and I have more fun now. And it's in terms of like people have this idea that you give up enjoyment because you give up addiction.
And, that occurs a lot, this thing, just have one big glass of wine and it'll be fine. Well, no, I don't need one big glass of wine. I'm happy just as I am. I don't need anything added to this moment. Or I don't need anything added to me to make this moment better.
And I've noticed, it's gone off you.
Well, so this element of surrender you mentioned, so this vow that they offer, a formal vow that they offer in Thailand, which is referred to as a satya, which means a truth, a realization, a truthfulness. But it's also surrender in the same way as in the 12 steps surrender. It's a surrender to reality, a surrender to the truth. My behavior, my alcoholic behavior wasn't serving me or wasn't serving anyone else. So the reality is, if I stop doing that, there's an opportunity for something new to develop, for something new to present itself. And so in terms of Buddhist recovery, that's where I like to drop the word recovery, because in from a Buddhist perspective, there is no recovery. We can't go back to something. We can't recover something from the past. In a Buddhist
Oh, I
sense,
see. Okay, got it.
everything is impermanent.
Yeah.
And this touchy subject of or this sometimes difficult subject of not self, I don't have a fixed, unchanging, permanent self.
Yeah.
So it's, for me, the two go together beautifully, hand in hand. Everything is impermanent, everything is temporary, transient, and impermanent, and I don't have a fixed, permanent self.
Yeah.
So that I can say that was who I was. It's not who I am. It's not who I will be.
Yeah.
So I'm a work in progress.
Yeah.
A great unfinished work in progress. So there's nothing for me to go back to. The future is bright and full of possibilities.
And what would you say to someone who's listening to this and they go, okay, I feel like I do have a problem. Maybe they're listening to this and they're thinking I'm going to have to walk past the off license or the pub, later. Or, I know my dealer's I've got my dealer on speed dial. All I have to do is get my phone out and and they're going, okay, they're listening to this and thinking maybe I do have a problem. Is there anything you'd recommend them to?
I don't know that I'm qualified to, other than to check in with what's happening for them and what's the kind thing for them to do, to use or not to use. As I say, I've got no problem with people taking a line of Coke or drinking a bottle of vodka, injecting a bag of heroin. That's their business. It's fine.
Yeah.
It works for them. It works for them. But it's on an individual basis, and this is where the Buddha keeps coming back to the individual basis.
Yeah.
Action lead to your benefit or to your
suffering. Does it work for them? That's the key thing, isn't it? I say, look, it's not about my values, but does it work for you? Does this make you happy? Does this fit with your values and the things you want to do in your life? And when it doesn't, then it's time to get help, right? And that
absolutely. So there's no judgment about this is bad or this is good, but there is a discernment whether this is skillful and wholesome, whether it does lead to suffering or whether it leads to benefit. And I can only go on my own experience, and not taking drugs and alcohol as just my life's got better and better on a daily basis.
Yeah, and learning to regulate work with the regulation of the body is definitely a big part of that, isn't it? To relax the body. I recommend a podcast I did for people listening on centering as well. That can be very useful around addiction, to relax yourself and come back to a sense of being regulated rather than off balance and grasping. That's a beautiful word in Tanha, isn't it, in Pali, which means grasping or something like that. But it's very visceral. It's very physical, that word.
It is. Pali words tend to have a texture to them, as I understand, and certainly Tanha, which literally means an unquenchable thirst.
Yeah.
A dryness and aridity. Yes, it has a very dark texture.
And that's quite different. It's sometimes translated as desire, which I think is a terrible translation, because, you can have a healthy desire. Like, it's coming up to lunchtime in a bit. I was up quite early. I might have an early lunch in about an hour. And there's a healthy desire to eat. And then there's when I get grasping into overeating or addictive eating or closing down difficult emotion. And that feels different in my body. And most people have got a sense of this quite easily. And you can play with this. We have people look at pictures of different things, or when we have breaks on our trainings, we get some coffee and biscuits and we bring them into the training and we say, okay, are you looking at that and breathing and thinking, oh, I'd quite like a cup of coffee? Or are you looking at that and you've lost track of everything else in the room? The awareness has closed down. You've stopped breathing. You're tense. You're off balance. People literally leaning off balance towards the coffee. And it's really easy to spot. And if you've got some embodied training, it's really definitely easy to spot. It's not subtle, is it? So how do people, can you say a little bit about recognizing the difference between a healthy desire, I want to make love with my wife, or I want to eat this food, or I want to nap right now, and grasping? How does that feel different for you?
Oh, that's a difficult question.
How do you know when it's a healthy desire rather than this addictive grasping?
I think there's an ease, certainly an embodied ease, and it doesn't come with any agitation, any mental agitation, even if that's a slightly subconscious agitation. So the difference between a healthy craving, unhealthy craving, the difference between tanha as as an unquenchable thirst, this as an aridity, a very dark craving, and the desire just to move away from suffering. The heart's desire to move away from suffering, to end suffering, to move away from suffering, which is called chanda. So these are they're both desires.
Yeah, and every breath is chanda, right? Like, why do you breathe? Because it becomes uncomfortable not to breathe. And you breathe out because it's uncomfortable to not breathe out.
It becomes natural, so it's natural.
As you say, that ease is a good barometer, isn't it? Like, is there still ease around this sexual activity? Is there still ease around this eating? Am I breathing? And I guess the other test is, can I stop it? Like I've tested this with things like, it's like, oh, can I stop porn? Yep. Okay, then fine. Can I stop eating? Oh no, I keep overeating. It's like testing it with things and going, can I stop? And people say to me, I'm not sure if I'm an alcoholic. I say, all right, well, do dry January, take January off. And if they look at me and go, no way, then I go, okay, maybe. And if they look at me and say, yeah, sure, then I go, you probably don't need to then. It's like, that doesn't worry you as a proposition. You probably don't need to do it.
Yeah. Although from my perspective, I'd ask people to look at what do they get from drinking.
Yeah, like what benefit does this bring, and is there a way to bring that? Like, I'm fairly outgoing and confident, so I can talk to people. I never needed that benefit, but for other people that might be their benefit, and it's like, okay, is that actually a social skill you can build, without the drug-assisted help, as it were?
Yeah, and I've got no problem with people enjoying themselves and having fun. I mean, I like to have fun. I encourage happiness, being happy, and certainly from the Buddhist point of view, I can't be happy tomorrow. And
I heard they almost called Buddhism almost got called happyism as a religion.
Possibly.
In the history, and the happy ones was one of the names of the Buddhist followers. And when you go to a monastery, people do seem happy, don't they? It's not like they're miserable the whole time.
Yeah. The Buddha said that, I teach one thing. I teach that there is suffering and that there is an end to suffering. And people view that the wrong way, but he's talking about there is an end to suffering. We don't have to go around, miserable all the time. Or what I saw in my own life, what I see in other people's lives, is postponing happiness.
Yeah.
I'll be happy when, I'll be happy if, I'll be happy then, I'll be happy over there. And it doesn't work. It's absolute. Yeah. It's a fantasy.
Waiting for the weekend or waiting for retirement or whatever it is.
I normally teach to drug addicts and alcoholics, or people suffering from addictions, compulsions. But I went to Kathmandu. I went to Nepal and Kathmandu, and much to my surprise, it was a group of 17-year-olds, what was described as at-risk 17-year-olds. So I generally taught my usual 5-day Hungry Ghost retreat about self-love, about self-forgiveness, about ethical living, how to do serenity, tranquility meditation, and I kept emphasizing that this point from my own experience. I can't look outside of myself for happiness. I can't look outside of myself for happiness. It doesn't exist out there. Happiness only exists here. Happiness only exists today. I can't be happy tomorrow.
In the moment, not even today, right? Yeah.
And whether some of my talks were translated in the whole of them, some of them in part. But I had a Facebook message during the week from one of these young 17-year-olds, and I asked him the question. I said, are you happy? Or I said, how are you? And he replied, I'm fine and happy today because I can't be happy tomorrow. So he'd got it. He realized he can't be happy tomorrow. He can only be happy right here, right now.
It's quite a simple message, isn't it? Vince, before we wrap up, there's one thing I was curious about. You'd done some work in prisons as well. That's one of the few environments I've never worked in. So I was curious, how was it to be talking about happiness and addiction, in the prison system? How was that?
It's difficult because of the environment I was doing it in the chaplaincy environment. So as a Buddhist chaplain, I was expected to go into prison and deliver a service in the same way as a Catholic priest would deliver a service, in the same way as a rabbi would deliver a service. So as a meditation teacher going into prison, what what do you do? So I would start with 10 minutes of serenity breath meditation, and generally would end up having discussions on Buddhist practice and ethics being one of those often discussed. And I would say to prisoners, would any of you be here if you'd followed the Buddha's 5 suggestions about moral behaviour? Not to kill or harm people, not to take anything that's not been freely given, to be not to commit sexual misconduct, to tell the truth and speak kindly, or not to take drugs or alcohol. And in fact, both the men's prison and the women's prison where I were, everyone said, well, no, of course we wouldn't be here if we'd followed those simple suggestions. And
I think ethics is almost uncool today. It's in a sort of postmodern world where anything goes, and we feel like there's this sense in society, people that I'm above morals. Morals is such an old-fashioned word. You sound like a kind of conservative vicar if you say the word morals or ethics. Ethics is a bit more okay, but it's still very untrendy. And for me, there's a real beauty in coming back to the kind of core truth that no, you'll literally end up in jail as well as miserable if you don't at least you don't incline yourself in this direction without having to be a saint or perfect.
Indeed. So it was, it's a difficult environment to work in. And as 8 or 9 prisoners out of 10 are all drug and alcohol related offences. I felt very at home. Working with those guys, I learned to stop looking at the registered white, how many years people had left to run, because that was it. That was clouding my own interactions, and just I'm meeting each prisoner on the day as they were that day. So to go into prison and say to prisoners who are there, from all the wings, be it sex offenders wing, whatever other wings that they come off, to say, in the Buddhist tradition, that was who you were. It's not who you are today. It's not who you will be in the future.
Yeah, the impermanent side of things really helps with that. And I've got quite a lot of friends who have served time in 12-step. Some of my best friends have been in jail, and some of them, one friend murdered someone in blackout, murdered his wife in blackout. Didn't even know he did it. And woke up the next day, dead body. He called the police himself, and it's, a lot of them have done shoplifting, for example, to support drug habits and the like, some prostitution. And I couldn't have imagined as a sort of, fairly nice boy from the countryside having friends that have done all these things. I mean, my friends are a bit dodgy growing up, but, they might have got an assault charge at the worst. But, these are some people that serve some heavy time, some of them. And then some of them are close friends now, and because it's how they are today that I'm interested in. If they're sober, I will associate with them. I have a coffee with them, have my haircut, whatever. It's not a big deal. Whereas that for me is not being in the past of their sort of previous misdemeanors, some of which were quite serious. The other thing is I definitely see a body, just to sort of wrap up with the body theme. There's definitely an alcoholic body. Sometimes I'm looking at someone and they're in a business meeting with me and they're a little bit maybe angry or resentful or impatient. And I look at how they're standing and moving and sitting and I go, oh, you're one of us, aren't you? And on the one hand, we all have this on a scale, but there's definitely people that have it more for genetic reasons and trauma reasons, I think, a mixture of those two. And, there's a definite body that you could spot. Do you know what I mean by that?
I can't say that I have. I'll keep my down. Yeah, I will keep my eye open. When I stopped drinking 21 years ago, I was 7 stone when I stopped drinking. I survived just on booze.
So in kilograms, that's pretty skinny, right?
I'm now twice the man I was. I was 14 stone. So yeah.
And there is an embodied transformation, though. You must see that between someone who comes in using and a year later of staying dry and sober. The difference is not just in health, is it? Their eyes are shining, they're standing upright with a certain spine, which is like, I'm proud of who I am today. They haven't got that Gollum body, like my precious, that hunched over lack of they're standing upright, they're making eye contact, they're facing. The whole embodiment has transformed. And some of my friends I can't recognize from when they crawled into the rooms,
Yeah, the word for metta, or the other word for metta, maitri, of this loving kindness practice, the original intention, or one of the original intentions of the word was to grow fat with happiness. That's part of this practice, to expand with happiness.
People get bigger, don't they? There's a size, not just sometimes physically, in different ways. Okay, let's wrap up. This has been great. Do you have any sort of final message or final thing you want to say on embodiment? Then we'll ask you where people can find out more about you as well. But is there any particular final message?
No. Other than the present moment is the only moment we've got. This body is the only body we've got. Our commitment to not harming ourselves means looking after our body, looking after our mind. Be happy today. You can't be happy tomorrow. And community is very important. So if you need someone to talk to, there's always there's a community for you out there somewhere.
Yeah. Whether it's the Hungry Ghost communities, the Fifth Precept, Noah Levine's one, in America. Whether it's 12-step, Alcoholics Anonymous, give these things a go. Even if I had a very negative image of some of these things originally, and actually they ended up being a lot of wonderful people. It's worth doing. If it's that or death, what have you got to lose, kind of thing. If anyone's listening to this kind of more seriously addicted, then it's like, really. So hungryghostretreats.org is your website, right?
It is, and Nalagiri-mindfulness.ie is Nalagiri House, which as an old pub I hope to open as a retreat centre early next year, serving mindfulness and nothing else.
Okay, can you send me that link and any others that you think would be helpful, like the Thai temple you mentioned that I probably can't spell. So if I'm going to send you an email just to wrap this up, Vince, if you could send back any of those other links. And when this is out, please do share it with your people. I'd like to get this message far and wide. I've had a lot of fun today. I felt like a kindred. I didn't realize we're such kindred spirits. So it's been really, really lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Don't forget, you can only be happy today.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.